Well, hey, welcome back to this series of podcasts for multiplying leaders. My name is Ben Ingebretson, Area Director for New Church Development in Dakotas and Minnesota Conferences. And I am here with my friend and partner, Brad Kaljanen at Cornerstone United Methodist Church. Brad, say a little hello and maybe tell us a little bit more about you and give us a little bit more of a picture of what it's like to sit in your chair week in and week out.
Well, thanks, Ben. I have been in West Michigan Annual Conference my whole ministry. Planted Cornerstone 27 years ago with one-year-old baby and had who we adopted from Korea and adopted a second one 3 years later. So my church planting days were done in the context of having two babies. And I remember those early summers. My wife was working on a master's degree. It was really, really tough to balance all those things and the demands of planting a church. So we made it through it, and I'm really glad to be here with Ben today.
So this series of podcasts is really focusing on adaptive leadership, the kind of deep values that drive multiplying leaders, in hopes that they stimulate conversation at the deep level in your circle of friends as you're receiving the podcast, and then set you up for a conversation around project development and applying those principles in your setting. So today, our focus is on leading change. In fact, I think of this as kind of the tipping point, right? This is the moment that defines where the future is going to unfold. I read recently that, the majority of coronary bypass surgery candidates are not able to sustain the changes in diet or lifestyle they committed to as a result of their health crisis. That's fascinating. I mean, you would think something so profound as bypass surgery would be life-changing, but reality is, for the vast majority, it's not. The point being that change comes hard, and it comes painfully slow for many of us on a personal level, for congregations, for sure, until you pattern a new normal. I mean, the change experience, the cycle, is just really not easy work. And so that's why we devoted one of these podcasts to leading change, not as though you can get it all here in 30 minutes, but hopefully it'll stimulate you to at least press into this area of your work. So I thought maybe a good place to begin, and I'm going to tee Brad up for a number of pieces here, because what he'll have to share is probably more interesting than what I have, but it's like, to change, you really have to start with some working capital. You need some trust in the bank, and I've always been impressed with the work of Stephen Covey, his books, The Speed of Change, The Speed of Trust. Covey makes the point that nothing moves faster than the speed of trust. Change follows trust. Trust earned, trust built. And so he offers a lot of different ways in which we can earn trust. I won't steal all Covey's thunder, but he talks about, listening and respecting and loyalty and resolving that we're going to face reality and showing improvement and being accountable and being transparent and keeping commitments. I mean, these are all different ways. You can find them online. Just go online to Stephen Covey, Speed of Trust, and he has his 13 trust-building principles. But Brad, talk a little bit about earning trust and how important it is in ministry.
Well, I think, Ben, just really practically, trust is earned over some time when you make just consistent good decisions and use common sense. People begin to see that you are just normal. And I have a friend in Fairview Heights, Illinois, Shane Bishop, who's actually writing a book called Love God, Love People, and Don't Do Dumb Crap. And it always cracks me up, because I hear stories of pastors and church leaders who do dumb crap. And honestly, you lose trust, and people aren't sure they're going to trust you with ministry decisions when you haven't used just good common sense. For instance, there's a pastor in our conference who decided to raise parakeets in her parsonage. And, when it was a small town, when word got around that birds were flying all over the parsonage and doing dumb crap all over the parsonage, she lost credibility. And so nothing that she said in the ministry context was going to make any sense because they couldn't get past their house being destroyed by birds. So simple little things, but over the course of time, when you make good decisions, when you are just normal and you are friendly and all those kinds of things, you establish capital for making ministry decisions.
So I've always loved a line, before you can lead somebody off the map, you've got to prove that you can lead them on the map. But we do come to that tipping point moment when you spend trust. I mean, it's a tragedy, I think, when pastoral leaders do the kind of stuff that Brad's talking about, is just kind of be normal and don't raise parakeets in the parsonage and earn a lot of trust, and then they never spend it, and it lays there on the table, and they go off to another appointment. And so we're going to talk about really going into that risky place, that counterintuitive step for many of us whenever we invite a threat to our security and comfort, and we say, hey, I'd like to challenge the congregation to do something bold and courageous. Brad, talk about a time when you spent trust big time.
Well, I think it's interesting to use that line about leading off the map, because there's a great old story from the Roman Empire with a Roman general who was actually leading the army, his command into northern Germany, and he stopped and he held up forward motion, and the Caesar in Rome sent word to him about, why have you stopped, and instead of moving on to conquer some more Germanic peoples, and he sent back a message that he had marched off the map. There are times in ministry when we're going to march off the map. We haven't learned this in seminary. No one has talked to us about how to deal with these tipping point moments. And as recently, actually, we've been thinking about the life cycle of churches. If you're familiar with the life cycle diagram, why has Cornerstone continued to grow over the years? And I've been able to identify about 5 or 6 tipping point moments when actually a new vision emerged at the tip of the life cycle, so that as we maybe we're coming to a plateau point or the beginning of a downward trend, then something new happened, and we had to make some bold decisions. The one that comes to my mind that's probably the greatest, single boldest decision that our church made was in 2008. We were in our first building for 12 years from the time we planted, and we built in 7 years. We were there 12 more years on a 10-acre site, and that site became so crowded, we were holding literally 7 services a weekend, trying to get people into worship. Kids were meeting in every spare corner of the building. We added onto the building twice. We decided that parking was now in jeopardy if we added again. So I still remember the Friday morning in 2007 when our trustee board met at Sandy's restaurant and made a unanimous decision to relocate. Now, I don't know if you remember what was going on in 2007 and 8, but the country was in the heart of a recession. Michigan was had the highest unemployment of any state in the union. It looked like an absolutely nonsensical idea to relocate at that time, and yet we had such a deep sense that God was calling us to do this, that the trustees voted unanimously. When the plan was developed, the congregation voted 97% to do it. And so 2008, we began a building program in a $13 million project. We were literally the only thing building around the Grand Rapids area. We kept one company from going out of business, and made a bold move to a 38-acre plot Because of the recession, we got great pricing and we got a great loan deal. And God has supplied the income ever since, and the loan is almost paid off in about 8 years now. So sometimes you have to make that bold decision, and that's one that I never regretted. I was scared to death at the time, but God reassured me that He was really in charge of this project and not me. But sometimes you just got to make the move.
There are foolish risks and there are smart risks. A foolish risk probably ignores wise counsel. Brad, I hear you sat with others and you had your best leaders in on this one, right? So foolish risks ignore and violate best practices. Foolish risks are ones in which we bear all the exposure. Smart risks are ones that are informed with best practices. You had all your church planting smarts working for you when you said we're going to move into a new place because you knew what to do to reach new people. And you were working that and you shared the exposure with others. So adaptive leaders, I've learned, are not excited about doing risky things. And therefore, they manage their risks very carefully. And that principle of bringing others along in the journey, that's one that, you were saying to me earlier, you guys do stuff as teams around here at Cornerstone. Say a little bit more about that, Brad.
I don't think there's ever been a time when I've unilaterally made decisions without bringing consensus around key leaders in the church. And so we're very team-oriented here. And it's my job to have vision and to lead with vision, but also to bring people along at the same time. And so every tipping point decision has been in, I would say, almost 100% unanimity, just because we've talked through the why. And when people understand it, they have a heart for mission. And it makes good sense, even if it's a little risky. Our leaders believe that sometimes you got to take steps of faith, and they're willing to do that. And so, but team is all important.
Talk about a recent multiplying move you made with your associate Ken. That one really stretched you a bit as an organization, if I understand it.
If I had to list one of the other tipping point moments in Cornerstone's life, it would be this. Ken Nash came as an associate here. We were good friends, and he was here about 6 years when he said to me, I'd really like to do a D-Min program in residence in Kentucky. And our church made a bold move to let him go for a whole year and continue to pay his housing, not his full salary, but his housing for a year. And trusting that he was going to come back with something that would benefit the church. And when he got to the program, he called me and we talked about what he might focus on, and we agreed that he should focus on how to start multi-site ministry. And so when Ken returned a year later, he didn't go off to somewhere else, and that was a risk I think the church took in continuing to support him through that year. But we put we made do with the staff we had in covering all the bases during that year. And Ken came back, and we launched the first multi-site, and we did that by recruiting about 100 people from our congregation and inviting them to 15 weeks of training on how to be a new church planter. We actually instilled principles into lay people, and that was a wonderful. And we required attendance for 15 weeks and had about 95% participation every single week. And at the end of that time, those 95 people, or 80 to 90 people, joined a campus pastor, and we launched a site in downtown, an urban site in Grand Rapids. And the biggest thing that I learned about that is that it's a team effort, and you have to bring people along to join you in the team. No church planter, no multi-site, no multiplying effort can be done alone. And those 95 people were truly pioneers, and they were great leaders. Everybody jumped into one role or another in the new site, and that site has gone fantastically well. In 4 years, they're averaging about 350 people now, and it has become a place to be in the downtown area. So Ken did a great job of training about 100 people, and the church here lost probably 100 really, really good leaders. And you have to be willing to do that, to let people go in order to multiply and to gain more, another place for the kingdom of God to be in operation. So I just encourage you to don't be afraid to let people go in order to gain something even greater.
It has been observed that most congregations actually have an addiction. Whether they're a declining church or a plateaued church or even a reproducing church, it would be so much easier, it would be so satisfying, so peaceful just to add more people. Whenever you start talking multiplication, right, for congregations even that, are more robust, have some strength and energy, that's still a very unsettling conversation because it's like you're splitting up the family. Brad, talk a little bit more about how uncomfortable has it been to be a multiplying church?
Well, I can remember when we decided to start a second service, there was all that conversation about, well, we won't see everybody every week, and so we build in a fellowship time in between, of course, but really we communicated that while it's nice to see everybody, and it's even nice to know people's names, that's not really our main goal. It's not a kingdom priority. Reaching new people is. And honestly, when you say that enough time, I really believe that vision is communicated from the front. And people pick up on it, and they start saying the vision, and they start speaking it. And so 2 services was an easy transition. I also remember when we planted a new service on Saturday night. And one of the ways that we've done that is to first go for about 3 months in getting people to commit to at least 15 weeks of a new service. And we said we're not going to start it until we get 100 people. And so that took about 2 months to get. And we finally started a new Saturday night service, but we had momentum of over 100 people right from the beginning. So it's really important. I would also tell you a failure story, because every church has both kinds of stories. At one point we said, in order to deal with some of the overcrowdedness at the old site, let's start a Sunday night service and do the same thing on Sunday night as we do on Sunday morning, give people another option. And I like to tell this story because we grew that service from 80 down to about 20 before we canceled it. So not everything is a success, and really we weren't discouraged by that. We just thought, well, let's try something else. And so every church has a closet full of things that really, really work well, and some that don't work very well at all. But you don't get discouraged. You just try something new.
Leading change is not for the faint at heart, and my hunch is that a lot of folks tuning into this podcast have been there, done that. They've got the scars to prove it. A couple of recurring proven principles from folks who talk a lot about leading change. The importance of creating urgency is so important, and then letting that urgency. And here's a word I've been fond of lately: letting urgency ripen. That is to say that oftentimes you have to come at the urgency conversation not just with a large group of folks, but you have to come at it individually with some of the key leaders in the congregation, and help people perhaps do a little grief work, because change is often about loss. I think we know that, and creating lots of urgency publicly doesn't always get you to the ripeness place that you need to really see the change happen. So a lot of one-on-one stuff, I assume, Brad, in your experience, then never expecting to get everybody on board. One of the biggest mistakes congregations, like, oh my gosh, you never get everybody on board. So Brad, I'd love to hear you tickle that one. And then this third point about, forming a guiding coalition. Sometimes there's folks who say, you know what, I really believe something needs to happen, but I don't want to be a part of it. Sometimes there's folks who are the real influencers in the congregation, and they're totally supportive of the change. They just personally don't want to attend that rock and roll service. So, having them and getting their endorsement as a kind of a guiding coalition is a really proven principle. I'm thinking John Cotter now, who talks a lot about leading change, and that guiding coalition of people of reputation that can stand behind you, stand with you. And maybe the fourth little principle here, getting a win. Congregations, we need to get wins, right? We need to build win upon win. And so I remember a congregation a number of years ago that was thinking about going off-site, starting another site. And they started just by doing, on a Thanksgiving, they did a standalone, a one-off service in a local high school, a second service in a high school. And because that was a win, it gave them confidence then to say, well, maybe we really could do this multi-site thing. Brad, take a bite on any of those principles. What have you learned?
I think in terms of the one you mentioned about urgency and letting things ripen a little bit, I have an architect in my church who's been with me for about 25 of the 27 years, something like that. And he has served on the building teams of every building project we've started and finished. And he's just a great person. But he said to me the other day, he said, you know why I stayed at Cornerstone all these years? He said, one of the things I've really liked about it, this church, is that you always leak the vision before we really implement it. And you allow it to build. And I thought, I really hadn't thought about that, but we do that. Even recently as this last spring, we leaked the fact that we're going to be attacking poverty here in Grand Rapids. And we did it through a message, and the momentum that came out of that message and the excitement among people to get involved in that. How can we get involved? Where do we sign up? And we were not even prepared for that yet, because we're launching it next year. But we leak the vision ahead of time and allow things to build that way. So I think that's really important. Every time we've started something new, we've leaked it a little bit, and allow it to ripen. And then when we are ready to go, you find there's this big consensus. And it's almost like, when are we going to start? Rather than, oh, what a surprise. It's not that at all. So
go to the dark side here for a minute and talk about sabotage. This is a common experience in ministry. Is you really want to take people, to a new place, and they'll kind of humor you for a while at the conversational level, but when it really gets down to stuff starting to happen, suddenly there's the sabotage thing that starts to happen. People act out. They're anxious, they're uncomfortable, they see something happening, they're not able to go there yet. Brad, what have you learned about sabotage?
one of the things that people say to me all the time is that, oh, sure, you can make change happen in your context because you were the planter and it was a new church and you weren't saddled with all these traditions and expectations that we have when we came into this new appointment. That's not, there's some truth to that, of course, but it's not entirely true, because what we found over the years is that people come with all the expectations they had from the last place they attended church. And I had a gentleman, just for instance, who came from a very traditional church, United Methodist Church. And he was so distraught by the way we were doing things. I mean, we did not have the same order that he expected in worship order. And what I discovered is that somebody was writing me notes and dropping them in an offering plate consistently, week after week after week, when we were in New Church Start. And they were always anonymous. And I thought from the handwriting that it was a male. I didn't know that for sure until finally one day something he said made sense. And I just said right to him, "Rich, are you the one writing these notes to me?" And he admitted it. And I said, "Stop it. If you want to talk to me, talk to me. You don't have to agree with everything, but don't write me anonymous notes and don't try to sabotage." And it's been really interesting over the years. That man has come on strong. In fact, one time he was on the original building team. And then he left because he wanted a church with more of a choir, and we didn't have that opportunity anymore. And then he came back and said, "I can't find any place like Cornerstone." And actually, now he's gone again. And so he has tried his best to change our structure, change our worship style, change almost everything about us to conform to his image. And I found that over the years, people want to do what they like. And what they like becomes more important than the urgency of the gospel. And that's one thing as a church leader you cannot allow to happen. Is what I'm comfortable with, what I like singing, the kind of style that I grew up with, whatever, is not important as what works in your mission field. Remember, you only have one business, and that is to reach people in your mission field with whatever is going to reach the most people. And that's just a guiding principle that you got to keep in front of you all the time.
Todd Bosnier, the author of Canoeing the Mountains, has some great advice for those of us who are leading people and managing sabotage. His 3 little phrase: you got to stay calm, you got to stay connected even to the people that are writing you the weird notes, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to stay on course. Stay calm, stay connected, and stay on course. So leading change is about process, and I'm sure you get a lot of wisdom around the table as you're sitting with your friends today. It's about staying anchored, as Brad was sharing there at the close, in your value to reach new people. I'm going to just cut you loose, and the discussion questions that Brad and I have teed up for you are in front of you. First, where do you need to earn some trust in preparation for spending trust? Second, what leadership move do you sense is near or at the point of trust spending? And how might you communicate that courageous vision with your leaders? Third, what have you learned about leading change that's been effective? And which of the following principles are most important for you to implement in your context next? Letting urgency ripen by having one-on-one conversations, building a stronger team or guiding coalition, becoming more familiar with best practices to reduce risk, or generating some small wins in the direction that you want to go. And finally, the fourth question: how have you learned to manage sabotage? And how does the wisdom of stay calm, stay connected, and stay the course fit with your setting? Join me next time when we'll be talking about visioning with a missional and incarnational bias. Bye for now.